friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Mama Elephant's Hey Pumpkin stamp set. I'm going to be coloring to match some pattern paper from the Full Bloom 6x8 by Simple Stories. So I'm going to flip through and find the print that I want to use as my inspiration and tuck it behind my cardstock panel so that I can pull my color palette from there. And I have stamped the images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. The first combo that I'm using is E50 and E51, and I'm going to do my bunny with these shades using the E51 for the shadows and then blending out with the E50 and letting that fade to the white for the highlight. And I'm also going to use them for the white parts on my fox. So once again, just using that E51 and then blending out with the E50 and letting it fade to white for the highlight. Same on both of these guys. Then I'm going to come in with some rosy cheeks using R000 and R11. And I'll also color in the bunny's nose. So I put the R11 down first and then traced around it with the R0 for the cheeks. And then for my fox, I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR18. Starting with the YR18, I'll give him some shadows. I'm doing them pretty even on both sides of his body since he's facing completely forward. And then I'm going to blend out that YR18 with the YR14, just pulling the edge of that YR18 into this mid-tone. And then I'm going to come in with the YR12 for my highlight and fill all of the rest of him in, just using little circular motions to break up the edges of the previous shade so I get a nice smooth blend. Once I'm done with him, I'm also going to color in the large pumpkin that the bunny is sitting in with this combo. So I'm going back to my YR18 and just tracing around the different parts of the pumpkin following the artist drawn lines. And I'm going to do the pumpkin lid that's cut off so that the bunny can sit inside. It's kind of sitting down below. I'm going to do that as well. So once I have that YR18 laid into the creases, I'm going to blend that out with the YR14, and each of the little sections is going to have a nice little highlight, the largest one being the one in the center because that one would be getting the most light, but also leaving a little bit of space on each of the side sections as well for that YR12, and just filling all of that in. So you may notice that the pattern paper is not actually fall themed. It's more of like a spring or summer color palette, this whole pad of paper. But I was going through my stash and I really only had one paper pad that had fall themes in it, and it was definitely more of a masculine color palette, and I wanted something that was a bit softer and more feminine. So I just went through my pattern paper pads until I found some patterns that I thought might work. I mean, there's the pops of orange and the yellow in there, and then the soft peach I just thought would be really pretty. You've got the pale greens. So I'm going to make it work for a fall theme card, and I think that is definitely a good idea to not just use your pattern paper for the intended purpose. You can always pull different patterns and use them for cards that are, you know, not necessarily in the same theme as what they were created for. So I've moved on to a slightly softer version of the color combo I had. I kept the YR12 and YR14, but added in the YR00. And I'm going to do this large pumpkin with the flowers coming out of it. So I'll just have that same tone in keeping in that color family, but just another variation. There's a lot of pumpkins on this card, and I didn't want them all to look identical. I'm going to do another pumpkin down next to the bunny with this combo, and I'm also going to do a few of the leaves. So just kind of skipping around and picking different items in this scene to have in the different color palettes. And I did forget to color in the back side of the pumpkin with the flowers in it, but I'm going to go back and do that now. I just colored in the whole thing with the YR14 so it would be in a little more shadow. And then I'm going to keep the YR00 and add in the YR02 and YR04 for another orange combo, and I'm going to do the small pumpkin that the fox is holding, starting with that YR04, blending out with the YR02 and then the YR00. But I felt like it was just a little too similar to the color of the fox. So I'm going to pull in the YR07 and do a second layer of that just to deepen that up and add in a touch more of that brighter orange shade to kind of just distinguish it a little bit since it's in his arms overlapping his body. And then I'll pick a couple more of these leaves to color in with this brighter orange combo. So for those I just used the YR07 and then the YR04, and the YR02 was the highlight shade. Next I'm going to switch to some greens, and I want to use some duller greens because that's the shade that we have with the leaves on the pattern paper. So I chose G40, G43, and G46, and I'm going to do the large pumpkin next to the fox and also the stem of the pumpkin in the fox's arms, starting with that G46 and then blending out with the G43, and then that G40 is such a pale, lovely shade of green. It really is very similar to the leaves on that pattern paper. So I'm going to use that for the highlight, and then I'm going to come over and do another pumpkin stem and another pumpkin next to the bunny with the same combo. Just making sure to trace over the edge of the previous shade and pull it into the next one so that I get a nice smooth blend there. I'm also going to do some of the leaves that are kind of mixed in with the flowers. I'm going to do the wider leaves in these arrangements with the 3 shades. I'm also going to do the base of each of the flowers that's showing. I only used the darkest 2 shades on those. I did all 3 shades on the leaves. And then I'm going to take just the G43 and do some of the other little leaves on the flowers. They're so super tiny that just 1 shade is enough. And then I wanted to pull in kind of like a dusty blue-green. I'm going to use BG75 to represent those small bell-shaped flowers in that pattern paper. And I'm going to color in these little, I'm not sure what you call it. They're like little fern-like stems. So just a few little pops here, not too much, just like there's only a few pops in that pattern paper. I'm going to keep it pretty simple on the card. And then I did pull in BG72 so that I could use those on a couple more leaves, and started with the BG75 and then blended out with the lighter shade. And I really like that addition on the fall card. It's just something a little bit unexpected. For the yellows, I wanted something kind of a golden yellow to go with the fall theme, so I chose YR20, YR21, and YR24. I'm going to do the centers of the flowers, and then also the flowers that are kind of closed up. I'm going to do those as well. And then there are a few little berries, and I'm going to do those using the YR24 and blending out with the YR20 because there's not a ton of room there for multiple shades. But when I got to the leaves, I felt like it wasn't really matching the pattern paper. So I'm going to pull in an extra shade here just to brighten up this combo because otherwise it's just a little too dull. So adding just a little bit of the YO2 on the ends is going to just kind of make it match with that pattern paper and that brightness level that is in there a little bit more. So I'm going to do one more leaf starting with the R24, blending out with the YR21, and then using the Y02. Then I'm going to do some brown tones with E43, E44, and E47. I'll do the fox's nose and then the other 3 pumpkin stems. And I'm just shading them all exactly the same with the shadow on the bottom right and the highlight on the top left. And then I'm going to use BG11 and BG13 for the little bird that is sitting on top of the pumpkin next to the fox. And then just use the BG11 to add a little bit of shading to the rest of the flowers so that they look kind of white, like the white flowers in that pattern paper. I'll take a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen to go over the eyes of my critters, including that little bird, to make them nice and bright and shiny, and then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I have taken a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and die cut it with one of the Mama Elephant Pika frames, and I am going to blend on some Distress Oxide ink. I'm going to do the top in Salvage Patina to pull out the BG11 and BG13 that I used in my coloring. So I'm laying that on nice and heavy at the top and just going back in and adding a bit extra right along the edges to draw attention to that stitching detail. And then for the bottom, I wanted to have a duller green to kind of match with the coloring and that pattern paper. So I decided to use Bundled Sage, and I'm going to add that at the bottom. And the horizon line is going to be completely covered up by my images, so I'm just blending these straight together, and then I'll just go back and forth a little bit to make sure that it's fairly even, but it doesn't have to be too precise because you really won't see it on the final card. And then I wanted to do some splatter details. I'm going to start with some plain water. I'm squirting it onto an acrylic block because doing it this way just gives you a little bit more control. It also gives you smaller droplets when you tap it off the side of an acrylic block. So I just like that size droplets. If you wanted to just, kind of flick it at your paper straight from the air, you will get larger size drops. So I'll let that soak in for a few seconds and then blot it up with a paper towel. And then I wanted more in the sky, so I did it a second time. And then I'm going to also press some of both of those inks onto the block. And I'm going to squirt some water into those to make them more fluid, and I will do some splatter with that as well. I didn't bother covering it up because, like I said, the horizon line isn't really going to be seen on the card. So I'm just tapping and trying to keep the blue dots to the sky portion and the green dots to the grass portion. But if they get a little bit out of, their area, it doesn't really matter. But I think I did a pretty good job. I also wanted to have some copper spots to kind of just tie in the fall theme. So I grabbed my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors and I'm adding some splatters with the copper shade. And then I am going to set this panel aside to dry completely. In the meantime, I'm going to work on my sentiment, and I actually wanted a sentiment that had something to do with thankfulness or gratitude, which isn't included in the Hey Pumpkin stamp set. So I went through my stash and found this set by Hello Bluebird called Fall Buddies, and it had a little speech bubble that said, "So thankful for you." So I'm stamping that in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, which is the same ink that I used for all of my stamping of my critters. I am stamping that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold. And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Fake Tan cardstock, and I'm stamping in Pumpkin Spice ink. And I'm going to use the image with the kitty inside the pumpkin and a couple of the leaves, and then the sentiment that says, "Wishing you pumpkin spice and everything nice." And those are all from the Mama Elephant Hey Pumpkin stamp set. I did have to clean off the stamp because you could see that it didn't stamp very clear the first time. It still had some manufacturer's residue on there, but cleaning that off and stamping it a second time worked beautifully. So then I'm going to go back to the Simple Stories Full Bloom 6x6 pad and choose 2 more patterns that I think can work with that background piece that I chose to pull my color palette from. So I've got this stripe piece on a diagonal, and then I have like this damask print with the mustard yellow. And I'm going to use the Mama Elephant Pika frames. I'm using the largest die. And that way all of the stitching detail is going to line up on the card. So I'm adding some liquid glue to the back of the floral print, and I'll add that to cover the entire card front. And then I'm going to take the diagonal stripe print and run that across the center of the card horizontally. Just making sure that that is right in the middle. And then I'll take the mustard yellow piece, and that one's going to go vertically down the center. So I'm just doing my best to get that lined up in the center and press that into place. I've also added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel to give it a bit of dimension on the card. So I'll peel off the release papers and line that up in the center and pop that down. And I did get that a little bit shifted to the right, which unfortunately now it's kind of too late to pull it back up without ripping the entire card up, but it's all right. So now I'm going to lay out my images and kind of get the placement how I want it before I start to glue things down. I really love the glue that I use, Barely Art Precision Craft Glue, which was recommended to me by you guys, and I love it, but it dries very fast. So I like to lay my images out first and kind of get an idea of where they're going, because I don't have a lot of time to change my mind if I don't like the placement. So once I've settled on how I want them, I'm going to start gluing them down, working from the back of the card forward. So I did the pumpkin with the florals in the background, and then down in front I'll have the bunny with her pumpkins, and then I have the little fox, which is going to go over on the left hand side, just overlapping that back pumpkin a tiny bit so that everything is really well integrated into the scene. And then above him I'll add that little speech bubble with that sentiment. And then I just have a couple of extra leaves that I stamped and colored, so I'm going to figure out my placement for those. And I'm just turning them in different directions so it kind of looks like a blustery day and that the wind has kind of blown them around. I'm also trying to make sure that none of the leaves are right next to another leaf that is the same exact color. So I did switch around the brighter orange and the lighter orange leaf a couple of times before I settled on it. I had them there, but then that was the same color as the leaf below, so I switched to the brighter colored leaf up by the speech bubble, and I really liked how that looked with the leaf overlapping the speech bubble, because once again it just makes it feel integrated into the scene and not like the speech bubble is just up there by itself. Just kind of makes everything flow together nicely. So once I have all of my leaves in place, I did want to add a little bit of sparkle to this card. So I decided to add some platinum stickles. So far I've really been liking this shade for fall. And I got a little too much out on the first leaf, so I've kind of been going back to that one and using it to help add some of the sparkle to the other leaves, but eventually I had to just wipe some of it off with my finger because there was just way too much on there. I'm just adding a little touch on each of those leaves to give them a little bit of something extra, and that is going to finish off this card. So I am going to lift that up to the camera so you can see all of the detail, see that sparkle and shine. And I'll give you another peek at the inside as well. I have to say I'm really pleased with how this one turned out. I love that color palette, and I think the pattern paper totally works for a fall card as long as you've got the fall imagery there. If you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep on watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. I want to thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.